That's me. I'm a games DA. My job is to help you making games on Android. I was previously making games myself since 2001-ish. I was working on Lionhead back in the day. I see someone here who worked with me at the time. And in Crytek afterwards, I'm a graphics engineer by trade, write shaders for food. And then I moved to Apple, where I was a GPU driver engineer. I didn't love it at all. Not Apple. No, Apple is great. Just the GPU driver stinks. Then I moved, I became a GPU profiler, which I love it. Performance engineer there, I love it much more. And then I turned into a watchmaker, worked on the Apple Watch. Writing shaders on a watch is something I would have never imagined I would ever do. And then finally back to games at Google. This is the Franometer 2.0. This is the improved version. And you can notice the improved pixel density. Smooth animations, 60 frames per second. The circle, it's all part of the improved version. I presented the Franometer 1.0 last GDC. It's very hard once you go back home and you look at the slides to convey what I feel about a certain topic. And that will help you remember how I felt about it. You'll see it. Now we went to quite a few places. We were in London, and then in Mountain View, and then we went to Japan, Korea, and China to profile games. When I was in China, this was Shenzhen. In China, you can notice about 2,000 people waiting for a taxi at 1 a.m. It was crazy, never seen anything like that. And then a very dodgy guy was trying to take me I don't know where, like no one was speaking English there. And I think I almost died finding a taxi to go to the hotel. That prompted me to learn Mandarin, which means next year I'm gonna give the talk in Mandarin. Get ready. Ni hao, wish Lao Fulan. My Chinese friends are there. They will correct me later. The idea here was, let's meet lots of game developers, people who are in the field. And let's see how they make their games. Let's use our tools on their games. Let's profile their games. Let's see what we can learn from them and what they can learn from us as well. Because we want to provide value. We didn't want just to go there and use their time for nothing. And so my job was see 14 different companies, around 50 different teams, and countless engineers, too many to count. And this is Bill, my colleague who was with me. You can see they were very happy to see him, except for that guy who was watching something on his phone. I mean, he's probably not a big fan of Sysrace. Speaking of which, that's Sysrace. That's the tool we used mostly to probe into the games we were looking at. This is an events-based profiler of sort. I love it because it shows a holistic view of everything that is going on in the system. This is the Android Studio version of Sysrace. And this one shows only one process, but the less flashy, more like get down to the metal and work kind of version shows absolutely everything. And I'm not going to go into details on how to use System Trace because that's first, there's lots of resources around. There's video by Tim Murray who knows everything about it. Just search for it, watch it. It will show you how to use this trace better than I would ever do. But the key point here is it's great for debugging slow frames. And in this talk, I'm going to show you Sys traces. and show you the problems that I'm going to talk about. And now to see in systrace, that's the problem. I know what the problem is. Fran told me more or less how to tackle it. Let's get down to work. In these 3 weeks, especially in Asia, I found myself saying the same things over and over again. These overarching themes that were coming out in every, I wouldn't say every systrace, but every systrace. Basically, one of them was there. So we thought about, well, let's put everything in one talk, and let's go to CDC and say something about this. So maybe next time I go, I will see less of this. Not that I love it, don't get me wrong. I would like to see something different as well. But these are common, very, very common. It's something that you want to watch out for. And let's get to the first one. Who doesn't love single-thread game? I don't. Android devices don't at all. Let's look at one. This is systrace. So on the left, you have a bunch of CPUs. On the right, you have a bunch of threads in a timeline. Pretty straightforward stuff. You can see there is a thread number 3 that is using up first CPU 4 and then CPU 5, and then bouncing between the two, and almost nothing else is happening in the system. This is as typical as it gets for a single-thread game. Many games are single-thread. And I get it. I get it. It's easier to do. The game works. It's fine. It runs at 30. It's great. Or it runs at 60. It's great. And in the console space, and when I was working on console myself or on PC, I get to 30, I'm done. It's going home. It's pub time in England. It's spaghetti time in Italy. Me, I'm Italian. I'm done. On mobile, no, you're not done. That's the beginning of your journey. Once you get to 30, you cannot stay there forever. You have to still optimize your game, because the more you optimize your game, the less CPU you use, the less battery you consume. Less battery means more time playing your game. At the end of the day, it's more money. Some games have a render thread and a game thread. That's awesome, and we're going to see it. I'm going to see it here. That's awesome. That's the way to go, ish. It's one step. Stick a queue between the two, push comments from the game thread to the render thread. Everything runs in parallel. We're good, ish. Here's another example, Unity main. This is a Unity game, purely single-threaded. Exactly like the other example, everything is happening on CPU 7, nothing is happening on the other cores. You can't expect this to be fast, and you can't expect this to last long at this regime. This CPU is going to get hammered. And there are some other little threads going on around, which is fine. But most of the work is there. Now, Unity, super simple. Click that, click that. Click that. That thing is good. Just click that. And click the one GPU skinning too. Just click both and be good, then you're good. This is stable. You have no reason not to click it. I've seen so many Unity games. I haven't seen a single one crashing. I tell you more, it happened last week. I was talking to a partner. It was like, oh my God, my game is crashing and loading. Everything is hanging. All the threads are hanging. It's like, well, try to go multi-thread. I don't know, maybe something will happen. Well, it stopped crashing, it stopped hanging. Just click that. It's unlikely that it's gonna fix a crash. At least you're gonna get to this situation where you have a nice main thread. Client is gonna be game objects most of the times. They send render commands to the render thread. This is actually interesting. They just send directly render commands. Normally, you see a kind of a queue, like ideal case scenario, a beautiful lockless queue. You just push commands, consumer from the other side, which is the render thread. The render thread grabs a bunch of commands and produces graphics commands to the GPU, which are my favorites. The GPU grabs everything, off it goes. One thing, if you're writing your own engine and you're not using Unity, be careful, because if you don't do this, I wouldn't say correctly, but in a smart way, you risk to introduce 1 frame of latency in your input. Running at 60, it doesn't really matter. Running at 33, it really matters. You don't want that. So make sure that you send your commands, same frame are gonna get rendered, things are nicely pipelined, GPU device does its job, everyone is happy. You get this. You can see Unity main and Unity device, GFX device, which sends render. Couple of interesting considerations here. That big black line is, during that period, is highly likely that that CPU will go idle, will go to sleep. It's gonna be power gated off. That thing doesn't consume power. It's also highly likely that since you're splitting 2 workloads, two threads, the system says, oh, well, I can lower frequency. And lowering frequency is a very, very good thing. This is very interesting because it shows that you're not gonna go twice faster. It's very unlikely. You will have beautifully balanced game thread and render thread. Everything goes twice faster. But you can get something back in terms of performance. That said, I don't see the single thread issue as a performance issue, but I see it more as a parallelize your workloads, please. It's a very good thing. Not only on the functional level, game thread, render thread, but also on the data level. Vulkan, for example, lets you push command buffers in parallel. That is awesome because you can spread this workload even better. What we saw earlier, the render thread becomes shorter and can be spread around. One of the reasons that I strongly recommend you to parallelize your workloads is that because if you don't do that, you consume more power. That's a problem. If you beautifully parallelize your workload across different threads, more chances to go to lower frequency state, less power consumption. Less power consumption means that you're not gonna go in thermal throttling so often. That happens all the time. And I've seen games that make $100 million a month thermal throttling. So we went there and said, well, You have to do something about this because it's not nice to play with a device that is hot. Let's look at it. A very cool thing of systrace is it gives you for each core the clock frequency. Look at that. These are 3 big cores that are running at max frequency. Here's the value. And the thread 3 that we saw earlier. Here's what's happening. Look at the big circle. Look at the frequency. Do you notice that they are in sync, all 3 cores? This means that the fact that thread 3 is hammering one core means that all the other cores are clocked at max frequency, regardless of what they do. Now, I put an equation on my slides. I can claim I know math. Power is something. It's capacitance thing. By voltage squared by frequency. So first thing, it's proportional to frequency. Lower frequency means I will consume less. Max frequency means I will consume a lot, and I will dissipate a lot of heat. Interestingly, cores are frequency gated at the same level per cluster. We'll see it soon. They are also volt gated at the same voltage per cluster, which means that higher frequency, you need kind of more V to just get the timings right, because they're very tight, at least from what I remember from transistors 20 years ago at university. Which means frequency goes higher, V goes higher, V squared goes even higher. You're consuming a lot of power. But now, look at that little n running there. There's a small thread. It's taking some time. It's not much. Who cares? But that thing that is taking not much, is running at full frequency, consuming a lot of power, even if it doesn't have to, because there's probably another core somewhere that can run this thing within the 30 frames per second or 16. And it doesn't, because it's tied to that core for some reason, and that core is being clocked at max frequency. There you are. That's your power issue. And one of the reasons is thread 3. If thread 3 goes to another core, frequency goes lower, they both consume less, and that little thing consumes less too. If there is one slide to remember out of here, is this one. And I forgot to put a face in there. Is there a face? No, totally forgot it. Yeah, whatever. Now, this is an Exynos. The important thing is look at the 2 clusters, CPU 0, 1, 2, 3. They're clocked at 1400 megahertz, and that's an A7. The A15 is clocked at 2 gigahertz. The cache is different, it's bigger cache on that core, on that cluster, which means that thing is clocked higher, that cache will consume a lot, and there's a lot more of it that will consume more. If that thing is powered down a little bit, and some of the workload runs on the A7, then a smaller cache needs to be powered. Power is important on mobile. You want to push as much work from the big one to the small one. Let's see another example. It's Unity. W is workers. It's a job queue. You have these small workloads. They all run on CPU 4 and CPU 5 and CPU 6. By the way, this is nicely multi-threaded. You will see, if you go a bit past of it, you will see it, the render thread. It's just not in this view. But the important thing here is Unity is smart. Unity doesn't know how much work you're going to send to your workers. So it's going to say, the system will decide where to run these things. And the system decides to run these things here on 4, 5, 6, and 7. Now, this is not a convention. This is what I've seen everywhere so far. Every SoC I've seen has the first cores little, small ones, and the last cores big, faster, consume more. I've never seen a case in which this is not true, but you cannot assume that this is not true. You need to write some code to find topology. But ideally, you want to take these worker threads and send it to CPU 0, 1, 2, 3, to the other cluster, because they will consume less overall. The other cluster is not doing anything anyway. The more you ship to that cluster, the more chances you have that the big cluster is going to go down in frequency. Rule of thumb, you want to ship as much as possible until your game still runs at 30 or 60, depending on your choice. That's an 855 Qualcomm. This is actually very interesting because on top of the little core, clock 1, big core, clock 2, there's another core that is even higher frequency. Interestingly, this is not gated with the rest of the big core, clock 2. But if I remember correctly, the voltage is the same. I'm not a hardware engineer, so just go and check on the specs. The important concept from here is power goes from there to here. You consume more on the CPU on the left, less on the 4 CPUs on the right. Takeaway. All cores in a cluster always share the same clock. I understand the other guys. That's less expensive. And I'm OK with it, even if my face suggests that I'm not. I'm OK with it. I swear, I am. But this is something to keep in mind very, very clearly. Now, this is all nice and good. We'll see another example. More worker threads. Unity main, they run on big cluster. Let's ship them off somewhere else. I really want to hammer this. Look at the small threads when you look at your systrace. See where they're running. And immediately think, I just want to put them somewhere else. They shouldn't be running here. The reason why I'm talking so much about threads and power is because by giving the same workload to the device, on mobile, you cannot expect performance to be constant. At some point, your phone can and will be throttled. That means that there is a process in a phone, and they're all different, and they will not tell you when. It's a secret for them. I wish they did, but they will not tell you when. At some point, they will decide, this thing is too hot. I will lower frequency for everything. You have a game, you carefully optimized it, it runs at 33 milliseconds on the clock. Perfect. 15 minutes later, it's 15 frames per second. The player gets angry because this thing looks horrible. and it was running so great, stops playing the game, you make less money. You want to distribute workload as much as possible. If the story ended here, you would go home and say, oh, well, that's all well and good, but how do I do that? Here it is. And that's code on my slide, so I can pretend I'm a programmer too. No, actually, I am. I've been programming since I was 8 or something. This is the call to set affinity. Thread affinity is a mask that tells a thread, I really want to run on this course. And the system will oblige, will actually do it. Which means you can take one of the worker threads, stick it to one of the first 4 cores, they will run slower, who cares? They will consume less power, I do care about that a lot. That's my smiley face, because I do care about that. Here we are, another example. This is the audio thread from Unity. That thing, straight to CPU 1, 0, 2, or 3. My recommendation, don't tie threads to a specific core numbered. Like, don't say audio will always run on 0. Say something like, audio will run 0, 1, 2, 3. You choose, because the scheduler is actually good at making this choice. As long as it's a little core, I'm happy. But let the scheduler, just give the scheduler wiggle room to organize his things. That like, these algorithms are good. Better than I can do it, for sure. That means that audio that is like a millisecond or so will probably take 3 milliseconds or so, and will consume much less power. I wrote some code. Who remembers this? Shoot 'em up construction kit. He does. It's from the 80s. And it says blurred because that's how Commodore 64 looked like in the 80s. There's not going to be a better image than this one. And I wrote some code that's a Unity plugin that has a native side that looks for CPU topology. It gives you back the CPU topology in Unity. Just look at it as a reference. And we'll also expose some high-level entry points to say, I really want to run the audio thread in Unity to a little core. Or I want to put the render thread to a big core. Because guess what happens if the system decides, the render thread is pretty quick. Let's stick it to a little core. And then suddenly your game was running at 30, and now it runs at 15 frames per second. That happens. I have someone here who knows that happened. So run the thread. I know that I need a big core. Just put it there and let it stay there. Audio cores, worker threads, Unity choreographer, I think it's the other one. Just go to the small cores. They're good. And this is code that will help you writing your native. This is not meant to be production, so just use it as reference. Let me see how we're doing with time. 40 minutes. I need a volunteer for 5 minutes. Come on. Who wants to come over? A volunteer wins a free sys race. You want to come over? Come in, yeah. You're tall enough. Gonna make a business portrait at GDC. This has never been done at GDC before. What's your name? Give me a smile. That's good, that's good. Give me a more like game developer smile. No, that was silly. A bit more? A bit less? That was good. I like this. That was good. Another one. That was good. Thanks, man. I'm going to send you later.
All right. That's it? Just get the pictures?
Later. Am I going to do it now? I have to go to Lightroom, just do all the good jazz, make you...
That's free, right?
I have to make you handsome, just going to take me time.
Oh, wow. Okay, that's another day.
It's going to take time. Heavy UIs, don't do that, please. Don't. It's a mobile phone. It's small. Don't do that. This is a systrace that I took where the UI took 100 milliseconds to be processed. Yeah, I wasn't happy. Complex layered UIs, where you have lots of layers, take CPU time. You don't want to spend the CPU time. 100 milliseconds is too much. 3 milliseconds is about right. It sounds silly, but if you can only update the ones that actually animate, that'd be great. Don't go around all UI elements. Ask, are you animating? Yes, okay. Are you animating? Yes, okay. Just bring a list. That's fine. And move UI animations to the GPU. If there's a health bar, I mean, just write the pixel shader. The GPU is better at doing this kind of work than the CPU is. Get these 100 milliseconds down to 3, 2. Now this is the other one. This one is good. The fact that you have 4 or 5 megapixel on the device doesn't mean you have to shade each one of them. Shade less. Please. There is a ton of fill rate. There is a ton of bandwidth that is used to read this pixel, write this pixel, process these pixels, do stuff with these pixels. No one is ever going to see 4 megapixels if you shade all of them. There's never going to be any difference. Just 2 years ago, the best kind of graphics from console was full HD, 1080p, 2 million pixels on 60 inches screen, and that was great for everyone. 4 megapixels, double on a small screen. How do I recognize that I'm in this situation? Well, when you are in this situation, you are GPU bound. You take systrace, you go and look for buffer counts. This line blocky one is the number of buffers that are in the queue, ready for the GPU to consume them. And you see this going 0, 1, 2. It means that the CPU is stuffing frames for the GPU to consume. The CPU is too fast. The GPU takes its time. And then when you see this behavior, you're GPU bound. You're GPU bound, look at the number of pixels you're processing. Because reduce resolution, and most of the times GPU bound goes away. Some of the times GPU bound goes away, if you're lucky. How do I do that? Well, got your scene, full screen, 3,000 by 440, it's too many. Reduce the resolution in one dimension, only horizontal. Reason is that if it's only horizontal and it's only one dimension, it's easier to filter. And it looks much better than if you're scaling in 2 dimensions. It just looks much better. There's better cache coherency. The texture you're going to stretch is going to be linear, not swizzled, which means if you start fetching all around, the cache will fetch all around and cache miss all the time. Just do it horizontally. It's going to cost less and look better. There's no reason not to. You scale this up, full screen. You take the UI on the right. You don't want the UI at lower resolution because thin lines disappear. You just get all sorts of problems. Just do it full resolution. And you compose the two, 58% fill rate saved, probably bandwidth. And I'm part of the UI in this game. That's a good thing to do. Should I put the rotation on this one too? I found the rotation too late. Unfortunately, there isn't another composer on every Android device, but it's not exposed. And that makes me hungry. And it costs GPU time to resize, so that's okay. It would be great to have hardware composer. We don't. On the other hand, it can be part of post-processing if you have a post-processing step. Most of the times you do. Sometimes you do. When you do, just use it to do the scaling. And you get kind of the scaling for free-ish. Now that you have all these tips, know how to spot in systrace some situations that I've just showed you. You know how to address them. Just go out there, make great games. I'm Francesco. Thank you. It's not finished yet. Systrace, you can download the latest version. Catapult there is the latest version. And you can get the command line Systrace, lots of information on Systrace. Android Studio 3.4 has the tool embedded, and that's me. You can find me on Twitter, ranting and saying stuff, or via email, or you can just Google me. You're going to find me. We have some time for questions, do we? We do have time for questions. Don't be shy. I'm not going to let you out anyway.
Good talk. Thanks for that.
Thanks.
Maybe this is off topic because you're talking about runtime performance exclusively, but memory optimization, I hate the fact that Android will just arbitrarily kill your device at some arbitrary threshold that isn't consistent. Did you encounter any tips and tricks to dealing with that?
Is this recorded? We're working on this. I feel your pain. Yes. We're really working on it. It's gonna get better. See what I can say about it. Yeah. Don't be shy. We have another 15 minutes. Ooh, someone coming. Thanks.
Hi, I was just wondering how easy is it to implement across platforms as well? Because this is really good for Android, but I know that if you're using like iOS or consoles, PC, is it easy enough to implement just for Android, or does all this stuff help for other platforms?
Did you say iOS here?
Unfortunately.
That's all right. The CPUs on iOS are really, really good single-threaded. Really, really, really good. So it matters less to multitask in iOS. That said, you still want to do it because basically everything applies. All the considerations on CPU frequency, they apply. The laws of physics are the same for Apple II, believe it or not. So power is going to be the same. And that side will apply. About number of pixels, they have less pixels than the average Android top device, because these guys are smart. Don't really need to pack so many pixels into it. So that applies less. It's more of a sane resolution. The UI applies kind of the same because still it's a better single thread CPU, so you will see probably will go from 100 milliseconds to 80. Still not great, right? So that kind of just be on the lookout. Tools are good, so it's easier to find out what's going on. I would say that everything I talked about applies. And the solutions are the same. Like, if it's not going to be the same call to set affinity, it's going to be another one, which is Mach set thread affinity of some sort. It's going to be the same in some ways.
So, thank you for the talk. You presented us with a really great two-track, two-thread solution for clusters of 4 CPUs. Is there an advantage to breaking it up more, or does that end up hurting us a lot more on low-end devices? Have you got any advice on how far to take those optimizations?
You have 8 cores, right, on top-end devices. 6 on kind of devices where you still want to run a game. You're going to get diminishing return if you try to break up more. And also, not every algorithm is parallelizable. So at some point, if you really have to invest a lot of time to make your algorithms more parallel, then you run into synchronization problems. You don't get full speed from there. It can get a mess. So, in my opinion, do it. If you hit 30 frames per second, you run the game for 50 minutes, and it stays at 30 frames per second. And you're happy about your battery, just don't go further, right? You can kind of stop there.
Just kind of keep it simple and take the big win.
Yes, but also have a job system that understands the concept of big and little cores. For me, that's a key. And you don't see many of those. If you have, for example, UI like that, you can spread it. That's super easy. You have a job system, you cluster your data and just go for it, right? That's super easy. Data parallelization, especially in games, depends on the engine. If you write your own engine, it's all game entities going parallel on the job system, and you're gonna be good. Functional parallelism, I will stick to just render thread and game thread. And then if you are Vulkan, go parallel command buffers as much as you can. Check where you're running and check that the Vulkan driver is a good one. Doesn't always happen. Okay. And these are every time you can do data parallelism, there's almost no reason not to, because this is very easy to spread across.
Thank you.
Welcome.
We again. Sorry. Sure. The UI example is great. I think I've been guilty of that many times in the past. One thing that wasn't clear, and if you can clarify again, is when you said about the horizontal scaling for rendering. specifically, and then the composition of the UI. If you can touch again maybe on that specific topic, and if you're just suggesting just like the resolution
Yes.
for your render targets to be smaller, because of course, like, okay, there is a stretching issue, right? Like, it depends what you're doing.
Yeah, you have to adjust the viewport.
Yeah, okay, so
Yeah,
the viewport will be adjusted specifically, but like, what other things can you do? Like, there is one directory we can render a lower resolution and then do the upscaling. You said that's not cache friendly at some point, and you will have other issues, but like other suggestions you can do specifically. It's not just applying less shaders, of course you're rendering less pixels, that's an old trick, but like, what else you suggest to do there? And especially for the composite side, because some of the UI eventually goes through the same steps anyway. So.
As a performance advice, this is more geared towards you have too many pixels, just reduce the number, and that's how you do it. Performance side, it's the usual, okay, I am GPU bound. Where am I GPU bound? And that we go into, unfortunately, we don't have the tools yet to tell you how we're GPU bound. We have some tools working on it. So that becomes the classical GPU engineer problem. Where am I GPU bound? Where I'm gonna work? What I want to say about the upscaling is, again, if you upscale on one direction, horizontal, you get very good quality and very good cache friendliness. On top of that, you can do, like, let's start from the point where you saved a ton of GPU time. So you can reuse a little bit of GPU time to get better quality at the cost of some performance, right? So you can think of running at lower resolution an edge detection filter and then do anti-aliasing on that. Because when you render lower resolution, you introduce more aliasing because you're filtering this signal at a lower frequency. Signal processing stuff. You'd want to do anti-aliasing a little bit. So while you do your nice upscaling on one direction, you can do some anti-aliasing there too, helped by an edge filter. This kind of stuff that kind of comes for free from the fact that you're upscaling. So you can take advantage of that. From a performance side, again, it's look at your textures, your texture fetches. Look at my password, I guess. What's the delay? Yeah, that's what I recommend.
Okay, so, thank you.
Welcome.
Hi, Fran.
Hey.
So if I have a background thread and I want to run that efficiently so that for battery power and all that, and it should be paced in a way that it basically from time to time my core should go to sleep and I want to really do something over multiple seconds and I want to have it so paced that my frame rate is pretty consistently remaining with that. Do you have a suggestion of how should I do that?
I think you touched a really, really good point there. One of the problems of let the system decide where to stick your threads, these algorithms are very good, but they do not know your workload as good as you do. One of the problems that you find is that I've seen cases where I've got my workload and it's running at 30 frames per second. Okay, I want to optimize it because I want to save battery. I want to do stuff. So I get let's assume for the sake of argument, I parallelize everything. It looks amazing. I just don't care about affinity, but I parallelize that a lot. And then it goes from 20 milliseconds to 15 milliseconds to render a frame. The system looks at all this thing. It's like, good, it's running at 15 milliseconds. Frequency goes down, and everything goes up. Like, all the time goes up. And then you blow the 33 milliseconds. And then your game suddenly, you optimized it, and it runs at 15 frames per second. The hell? So by setting affinity to threads, the way since you know the workload, it's a bit tedious to do. You have more, not only better power consumption, but you have more stability in the things that are going to happen in your system, right? You can expect less of this. Oh my God, what's happening? Everything is running slow.
Well, let's say I cannot use affinity.
You cannot use affinity?
Yeah,
I'm so sorry.
sorry.
Well,
Then,
that's
well, for example, I was thinking of measuring the time, how long my thread was running, and then put myself to sleep. But it's a little bit like cooperative multitasking. I don't like that. So
Don't do
I want
that.
to have kind of more like preemptive multitasking where I can set my time myself because I know how much workload I have left for a second or something that I want to do, and I want to split it up over the frame rate that I have, and then I can pace it. But I don't have a good instruction.
you're playing
for-
God here. Don't do that. It might work on one device, and then, hello. You go in the field, and you don't know what's going to happen. I definitely do not recommend it. Frame pacing, though, is another issue that you just touched. And we're working on it as well.
Thank you.
And it's more or less what you just mentioned. But that's frame pacing. That's not, I'm trying to make my thread go to sleep kind of thingy.
Hey, me again. I was just also wondering if you had something like a Unity application that wasn't like it wasn't very like using much CPU at all, runs at 4,000 frames per second or something like that. Like, could you force everything to just run on the low-powered CPU? Is that easy? And if so, could you point to somewhere to look at? Like,
Sorry, if I understood it correctly, you asked me if
it's
I have
all-
a fast Unity application, can I make it run on a little core?
yeah.
Yeah, sure. That's what
So
it
that's-
should.
Yeah, so you can force it just right from the start, just keep using Slate one? Okay.
Yep, you
So that's all
download that
that
code,
stuff? Yeah.
you test. Again, this is not production code, just for look how it can be done. And then you say, I want all threads to run on little core. Have fun.
And I was also going to ask, so that there, as someone else touched earlier, like if you do support really old devices that don't have like the 8 cores or the separate ones, is that like that is all supported in that code there, or is that going to cause some trickery or some break-in? And because I know that, yeah, like the game I work on only like does support really old devices. So I was just interested to hear that.
Here's my recommendation, and that's what I do in that code. I look for the topology. If it's 8 cores and I know the topology, I do things. If I don't, for any reason, and I'm not sure about the topology, I'm not doing anything, I'm not touching it. I'm not even trying, because I'm not sure. In the worst case scenario, you're not doing worse than what you're doing now. If you detect a device where you know how it works, good, you can get this extra battery life, this extra performance. How long do we have? 5 minutes.
Friend, one more thing. Thread -3, what is it?
Pass. Next question.
I've seen it before, I want to know it.
Next question. I anonymized all this stuff, right? Except maybe for thread 3. But I was like, thread 3, who's gonna guess? Next question. It cannot be my mom calling me. Cool. If there's not a question, I give you back 6 minutes. And I'm gonna collapse somewhere. I'm sleepy. I'm tired. It's my 3rd talk of the day. Thank you, guys.